the EscapeGoat podcast. A podcast series featuring the discussion of many different topics, flaws and all, based on personal whims and fascinations. Hosted by me, David Blake Fagiani, and several different guests. Welcome to the EscapeGoat podcast, episode 9, and I'm very happy to welcome back Matt, my brother. How are you doing, Matt?
Hey, dude. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not so bad. Yeah, I've had a big old walk yesterday. Walked across South London a fair bit, did a bit of sunbathing, got a bit of the touch of the sun. Actually, I've gotten a bit pink. So yeah, it was nice for lockdown. I guess what might be kind of late lockdown, assuming everything goes.
Late lockdown, week 9, week 10. What, are we in week 10 now?
I think I saw some counter on a website the other day that said to like day 68 or something, and I was
wow, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, it kind of feels about right, doesn't it? It was sort of vaguely horrifying to see that figure when you sort of tot up every single day that's meant to you and what it's kind of meant for our lifestyles, you know.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, you know, I really can't complain personally too much because I've got like a 2-year-old son, and it's been like a great opportunity to spend, you know, a lot of time with him and everything. So, you know, a lot of people have had it, you know, worse, you know, than me for sure. The only, you know, sort of side effects of lockdown for me have been slight exhaustion and slight boredom at times, but very, very rarely.
Yeah, I'm actually, it's one of those things, isn't it, where you kind of, you almost think there might be something wrong with you if you're doing relatively okay in a situation like this, because, I mean, you know, obviously glad we got our health and everything, you know, and everything, but it's kind of...
Yeah, that's the main thing.
I'm actually sort of surprised how much my mental health has generally held up, you know, and it's almost surprised me a little bit because I've had very few days where I've been like properly slumped or, you know, like energyless, and it's a really good thing, you know, because I mean, apart from anything else, I'm still working, you know, so I sort of need a minimum level of check-in energy to maintain appearances.
Yeah, I think it would have been a lot more difficult for like mental health if I hadn't had, you know, my son as a project to be, you know, looking after, because I mean that is as good as work. You know, childcare, you know, is definitely a full-time occupation. So you know, and well, because you have to keep doing it at weekends as well. So it's very much a an overtime occupation. But no, it has been a joy. And as I said, the worst it's got is slightly exhausting. You know what I mean? That's all. You know, and I really can't complain. Plus, I think we've had has it been like the nicest spring, like the hottest spring on record or something?
It's been
like the weather's been great.
It's been one of those consistently nice ones, hasn't it? It's not been one of those ones where you get like an early burnout and then it all goes awful. Like it's ramped up gradually and gradually. It's just been nicer and nicer.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, can you imagine if this had happened in like late November or something? You know, it would have been, you know, there's poor people who had, you know, didn't have gardens, would barely even be able to go out for walks. It'd be so cold.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think in that respect, it's landed at, you know, a better time.
Yeah. I mean, I won't be, you know, the focus of this podcast isn't the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, but I'm just hoping that we don't get a late resurgence in the year, you know, because that will be grim. If you know, if we get to about October, November, and things seem to be getting worse, and we've got all the kind of repeat effects of what we've just been through, but with none of the silver linings, you know, that's going to be...
Well, yeah, exactly, and that's what people need to kind of, you know, be cautious about, and I think that, you know, we won't even get into the government's handling of this, but yeah, it's not good, and there is precedent for it, isn't it? I mean, it has, you know, in previous pandemics and stuff, you know, they have seen second waves, and the way it's going with, you know, people piling onto public transport and piling into the beaches and so on, it's really not looking good, but
it's quite alarming, isn't it? Yeah, fingers crossed. I mean, I should say for the listeners, we're recording this episode on the 31st of May, and this episode will probably see the light of day in sort of early to mid June. So that's where we're at the moment, and the way things have been, you know, that we could be looking at all kinds of situations in mid June. You know, hopefully it'll be, you know, I mean, even if you're cautious, which I completely understand, and I certainly am, one would hope that mid June at least we'll see some improvements in things, but. Yeah.
Fingers crossed, dude. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed indeed. The reason I've asked Matt on the show today is to talk about two, on the surface of it, wildly different movies, and that's partly why I was enjoying the concept when I pitched it to Matt. But I asked him on to talk about the movies All About Eve, the 1950 classic All About Eve, directed by Joseph Mankiewicz, and also the... Oh, I should have looked up when it was made. The 1989-ish movie.
Yeah, it was released in '89, and late '89. It was released in December, so I assume that it was probably they started filming very early in the year. So yeah, it must have been an '89 production completely.
Great. The 1989 movie Meet the Feebles by Peter Jackson. And I hope our audience will see some of the connections, thematic and story connections between the two movies. But I'm also honestly enjoying the contrast. So I hope.
I'm enjoying the making a Meet the Feebles podcast classy by including All About Eve in it at all.
Yeah,
It's quite a clever technique.
Or classing up All About Eve by adding Meet the Feebles.
Yeah, and any people who've seen Meet the Feebles will probably agree with that. Because it's I just like to. Oh no, sorry. Yeah, when we're talking about All About Eve first, aren't we? I've got like the Feebles stories coming out already. Sorry, I can't control myself.
That's all right. Hold them in. There'll be time. Don't worry.
Okay.
No, I have got the kind of dream of this podcast episode attracting like a really high-minded, almost like Gil from Frasier-esque kind of theatre critic type for the All About Eve content, and then being horrified to learn that Meet the Feebles exists, and vice versa.
Yeah, I have to remind myself that there is people who don't know that movies like this actually exist, and and also what a shock it was when I first saw Peter Jackson's early work, in sort of like the early noughties. I remember like being completely stunned by just how people make films like this. It's just incredible. It just opened up all sorts of all sorts of avenues of creativity that I just thought this is actually something that adults do. This is insane.
Yeah, no, I think me and Matt will both be bringing a bit of VHS nostalgia to the second half of this discussion.
To be sure.
Just to start discussing All About Eve first, this is the audience should know you've watched this for the first time on my asking, haven't you, for this podcast?
Yeah, I'd never seen it before, and obviously I knew the name. Like most classic movies, you kind of know the title, but I hadn't seen it, and it's I must say it was really quite brilliant in the way that Citizen Kane kind of struck me as being way ahead of its time, and one of these movies that stood, really stands the test of time as well. There's everything about it. I think it's the characterization of of people in it. Just it felt so natural in a lot of ways. Especially the lead. Bette Davis was really the standout for me in this. I just thought she was just amazing. Like brilliant. I think. Because I kind of, it almost been sold to me as like a Marilyn Monroe movie because it was her first performance, but obviously that's very, she doesn't make, she makes a huge impact by doing very little. But yeah, I think Bette Davis was, I just thought she was brilliant, like absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it's often it's remembered as quite a highlight of her career, and especially well, I was going to say especially for an actress of her day, but for these days as well, for an actress who was I think 41 when they filmed it.
Really?
Yeah, it was. I mean, obviously the movie is partly about the getting older of actresses, but it was quite an actual real life achievement to have a sort of such an impressive and lauded and plauded leading role by an older actress, especially as Hollywood was really only getting to the stage where its initial leading ladies were getting old, really, It
was kind of life imitating art then in a way. I mean, it was kind of that. I think that's what's kind of so powerful about it, is it's so honest. It's got that kind of, it's a bit like in the way Brief Encounter, is just so kind of close to the bone, like, and it just kind of deals with these things that you think that classic Hollywood wouldn't deal with in a way. And I think that's what makes it more timeless, is that it's kind of difficult to watch really, because you just see the decline of someone and the sort of the mental decline, and you just think, for what really at the end of the day? Feel like that's the sort of tragedy of it.
Which, I mean, the film is perfectly happy to make that point, isn't it? I mean, it revels in the kind of questionable point of collective art making and the weird world of the theatre. You talked about it reflecting like the real life of Bette Davis and her sort of real career. This is quite well known, but I just didn't realise until I looked up this time, if I ever knew, I'd forgotten that the guy who plays Bill, the theatre director that she's romantically linked with in the movie, Gary Merrill, she actually did become romantically involved with him on the set of this.
Really?
And he'd been married previously, but he then she became his second wife, and they were together until their deaths in like 1990. died within a few months of each
Oh,
other.
so I guess that kind of worked out then.
Yeah, no, it did. Yeah, and he is as well as the character being younger than her, and then make a point of that. The actor also is. I think in real life he was about 5, maybe 6 years younger than Bette Davis. So it was that kind of relationship, And he's actually, I was looking up Gary Merrill because he's quite a storied like Hollywood actor. He was never like a superstar or anything, but he did that, and he did a few episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which I might track down.
Oh, wicked.
Yeah, because I think he's really good in it as well, actually. He's not, obviously Bette Davis deservedly steals the spotlight alongside people like George Sanders. It's hard to imagine the movie working well without him.
Yeah, that voice is just amazing. He kind of reminded me, I was thinking that, if it was made now, maybe Stephen Fry could play that part.
Oh,
He's got that kind of, tall, lordly kind of, attitude that, he can be really smarmy. And really, but really cutting, but also really funny and kind of entertaining at the same time. And I think that's how the movie worked for me. Is it kind of went from very whimsical to very, very serious in a really short kind of time span. And that's what it kept you on your toes. When you were watching it, you didn't quite know what the tone was going to be in the next scene. I just thought that was great.
Yeah, I want to, as you say that, I want to bring you back a little bit later to the final scene between George Sanders and Anne Baxter as Eve, because I think that's a really great example of that kind of tonal shift in a good way that it manages to pull off. I had a thing. I saw All About Eve, I think when I was about 18. 19. I bought the DVD of it, but it was one of those ones. On a previous podcast, I talked to Rich about Western movies, and I was talking to him about the Danny Peary book, Cult Movies, that we sort of inherited from mum and dad, and that I was reading at a fairly early age. And it presents its movies, its cult movies, that it goes into alphabetically. So All About Eve was right near the start of the book. I think it was just after Aguirre, Wrath of God. So this is
right, yeah.
Yeah, so once again, this is one of those movies that I'd read about probably at least a good 3-4 years before I actually got around to seeing it. I wasn't quite ticking off every film in the book, but I was doing quite a bit of that in my late teens. And it's got a capsule review of All About Eve, and talking about how in the early 80s, which is when the book was published, it was already a bit of a cult repertory movie. In fact, it talks about it as one of the first what you might call cult movies, like a lot of kind of I suppose predominantly American kind of cult screenings of the movie that came out after its 1950 launch. Because it was very we're talking about a cult movie. It was actually phenomenally lauded. It wasn't a sleeper hit. It was written about.
Yeah.
It was talked about. It won multiple Oscars. In fact, I think it set somewhat of an Oscar record at the time.
Really?
For nominations. And it was also, I didn't realise this first, it was actually the first film script to be published. It was made commercially available.
No way.
Yeah, which is something it's still, it still doesn't happen for every movie, but it's something we kind of take for granted now, isn't it? You wouldn't blink at that, even quite pulpy movies having the script published, but it was, it had a sort of literary respect to it, which I guess the one notable thing about the 1950s is that right from the very start, you had this kind of process of gradual legitimization of movies, didn't you? Because that's when you first have the sort of cahiers de cinema guys coming together, and people like Hitchcock becoming auteurs and being talked about that way, and I suppose at least
like the French New Wave and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's funny that, isn't it? Because in All About Eve itself, you've got such a focus on the theatre, and I don't know if they really. I mean, they do talk about Hollywood, don't they? Because Bill's going out to be a Hollywood director, and he's making his first steps in that direction. And also,
there's a lot of don't sell out, don't do that, because you'll be a sellout and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, totally, yeah. And you've also, I think there's a reference to Marilyn Monroe's character is seen to have basically tanked on an audition, isn't it? And then it's just said that what she'll do now is, because she's completely failed in the theatre, she'll go into television.
That was incredible to me. Because that was, I think, that's like a really dated thing now. Because it's like television was seen as kind of a place where actors went to die. And like now in 2020 it's kind of the complete opposite. It's like if you're doing like TV is now lauded maybe even more than like big studio movies. Like
yeah.
If someone said I'm in the next Netflix original, you'd be like, really? That's like the top of the game now.
Yeah, it's comically reversed, isn't it? I like that. I think George Sanders gets a line there. Marilyn Monroe's like, do they have auditions for television? He's like, my dear, television is nothing but auditions, or something like that.
Yeah,
it's a great snobbish line.
It's great. And Marilyn Monroe. Just speaking of Marilyn Monroe, her first appearance it's a kind of a bit part. It's a very small part. She comes on as basically like a girlfriend of one of the is it George Sanders or one of the directors? I can't remember.
Yeah, Addison well, I think she's escorted there by Addison DeWitt, isn't she? Because her role is Miss Caswell, and she's this like small debutante kind of in the theatre he's trying to kind of encourage along for what you realise are fairly sleazy reasons. You know?
Well, yeah, that's true. And like, but when she enters the frame, you've got like the three characters standing there having a conversation. Marilyn Monroe just listening to what's being said, and you just can't take your eyes off her. She's just like so amazingly beautiful. And then not just that, when they get into the scenes after that, and she gets her like few lines that she gets, she's really funny.
She's very funny. So she really holds her own.
She's incredible. Yeah, and so she's it really is not just a good look. She was a wonderful actress as well. And
wonderful comedian. I mean, I'd actually watch a spin-off movie that was just sort of set in the midst of All About Eve. That's just about Addison and Miss Caswell. Because she's such a great mirror for him. She actually manages to like cut him to the quick a few times. Even though she's portrayed as a less intellectual character than him.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's what I liked about the film was it kind of didn't really play to necessarily like sort of I guess stereotypes. It really showed you the strings of what was going on behind the scenes, and I think and it really picked it apart. And I think any film that does that and shows you how an industry works, or how sort of media and celebrity fame shows you the strings behind that, it kind of it does make you feel kind of uncomfortable, because it's like the medium that you're enjoying, it's kind of picking it apart. And,
it's a very warm. It's a very warm human film with a lot of sympathy, but it portrays a very deeply cynical world, doesn't it? I mean, it does not portray a nice place to work, and it kind of makes the point that most of these people are, always verging on unhappiness. They're all at risk essentially. It's a real jungle.
Yeah, exactly, and it kind of makes you, it's almost like a drug, I guess. It's like, once you're in it, it's very difficult to get out, and you just kind of want to scream to like the up and comers, just like don't do it, and it's like that spot, that last shot was just profound, like of the the woman who comes over to Eve's place and starts like wearing her dresses and spinning around in the mirror and looking at herself. You're just like, no, like don't do it, like that's just it. You see that very much the cycle repeating.
Oh, it's fantastic, yeah.
So tragic, yeah.
I'm nothing but a body with a voice, no mind.
What a body. What a voice.
That ex-ship news reporter, no body, no voice, all mine.
The gong rang, the fight's over, calm down.
I will not calm down.
Don't calm down.
You're being terribly tolerant, aren't you?
I'm trying terribly hard.
Well, you needn't be. I will not be tolerated, and I will not be plotted against.
Here we go.
Such nonsense. What do you all take me for? Little Nell from the country? Been my understudy for over a week without my knowing it. Carefully hidden, no doubt.
Now, don't get carried away.
Arrives here for an audition when everyone knows I will be here. And gives a performance. Out of nowhere, gives a performance.
You've been all through that with Lloyd.
The playwright doesn't make the performance, and it doesn't just happen, and this one didn't. Full of fire and music and whatnot. Carefully rehearsed, I have no doubt. Full of those Bill Sampson touches.
I am sick and tired of these paranoid outbursts.
Paranoid?
I didn't know Eve Harrington was your understudy until 2:30 this afternoon.
Tell that to Dr. Freud along with the rest of it.
No, I'll tell it to you. For the last time, I'll tell it to you. Because you've got to stop hurting yourself and me and the two of us by these paranoid tantrums.
Oh, that word again. I don't even know what it means.
Well, it's about time you found out. I love you. I love you.
Ha!
You're a beautiful and an intelligent woman.
A body with a voice.
A beautiful and an intelligent woman and a great actress. A great actress at the peak of her career. You have every reason for happiness.
Except happiness.
Every reason. But due to some strange, uncontrollable, unconscious drive, you permit the slightest action of a kid like...
A kid?
Of a kid like Eve to turn you into an hysterical, screaming harpy. Now, once and for all, stop it.
I thought you'd when I asked you to watch this, I thought you'd really enjoy the opening. Where you've got the presentation being given at the Sarah Siddons Society, and a bit like Mankiewicz's. Because I should say, for people who don't know, Joseph Mankiewicz was the co-writer on Citizen Kane. Amongst his numerous other production and direction credits, and his direction and writing of All About Eve. He also produced the Philadelphia Story, by the way, with Jimmy Stewart, Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn.
Ah, right, big players.
Yeah, he was not. I'd actually. This is my. Fading film knowledge coming into play. I thought of Joseph Mankiewicz as almost like something, despite these and Kane, something of a Hollywood footnote. But he had a huge career. Like, I was sort of almost borderline feeling sorry for him going into this. Don't anymore. A quick draw through Wikipedia. He did fine. Don't worry.
Yeah, he did all right.
Had a much more stable career than Orson Welles, of course. But you know, that's a whole other topic. But yeah, that opening where the you know, a bit like Kane, you've got events happening that you then go back and kind of explain and fill in the gaps, because you've got Eve, the up and coming actress, already standing up to receive her plaudits, haven't you, and her award, and you've got that great George Sanders introductory monologue where he just takes you around the room, basically introduces you to all the characters that you're about to see, and kind of it's so efficient, you know, because he basically tells you, it's very theatrical actually, he tells you all you need to know about these characters that you're then going to see work out this whole drama, and obviously the expressions and looks on the characters' faces then get given a lot more context as you realise what their relationship is to Eve, you know, as you go on. Yeah. And I think there's a very, it's kind of lazy to describe it this way, but there's a very Scorsese-esque freeze frame on Eve, isn't there, where she goes up to accept the award, which I thought you dig.
Yeah, it was Goodfellas, absolutely. Like, you know, it really was. It reminded me that it was the sort of the the genesis of those kind of shots and those kind of scenes in Scorsese movies, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because It's a Wonderful Life is also held up as one of those movies, isn't it? You know, when George Bailey's in the in the fishing shop and he does that, you know, puts his arms apart and freezes so that the angels can talk over him. You know, that's from only a few years before this. So yeah, you do in films of the late 40s, 50s. You know, I mean, obviously some of them are famous for coining genre tropes. You know, film noir movies, that kind of stuff. But you've all, just in the mainstream cinema of that time, you've got a lot of quite innovative techniques and styles coming together, you know.
Yeah, it's really starting to play with the editing and the form and stuff like that, and you know, because it's, you know, it's always kind of important to remember that like film at this stage is only about 25 years old, or thereabouts, maybe 26 years, 27 years old.
Well, I think certainly film is like a sort of codified mainstream, you know, like something where everyone knew the rules. You know, that's kind of what I meant by Bette Davis being like one of the first leading actresses to grow old in cinema. You know, it's kind of the sort of, it's kind of like with the first rock and roll stars. You know, like when you Mick Jaggers and stuff started getting like out of their 20s, you were kind of rewriting the rules for what that was like. You know, for what that was about, for what their albums were meant to sound like, for what their lyrical preoccupations were meant to be like, for whether they toured anymore. You know, and that's men. That's men. Obviously, it's always been more difficult for women. And it's, part of the reason Bette Davis shines so bright in this, I think, is she's the perfect alliance of an actress at that life stage, dealing thematically with the things that Margot Channing goes through. It's an interesting film actually, because, you know, most people would have, despite the title and Anne Baxter's performance as Eve, which we'll talk about shortly. Margot's usually, you know, Bette Davis and as Margot is usually seen as the star in the centre of the movie. One thing I quite like about this movie is it is a true ensemble. Like it shifts focus quite a lot. You know, and there are stretches where Margot is absent. You know, and it's everyone can kind of carry that weight.
Yeah, there's really no weak links in it at all, and that's what was great. You know, no matter, you know, you have these kind of sort of trivial scenes. You're sitting on the stairs and discussing what is theatre and what is, you know, acting, all this stuff. And everyone, you want to focus on everyone. There really is no weak links in it at all. Yeah,
I mean, and the dialogue is just, it's funny. Like I was saying, you know, it's a published script, and it had this sort of literary appeal, and it won Oscars. You know, it's a very revered movie script, and I think part of the reason it became a sort of screening cult classic is that quotability. You know, I mean, fasten your seatbelts. You're in for a bumpy night is only one of the more famous lines in it. But, you know, you really, I mean, I'm not really into this, but an alternate version of this podcast would literally just be us running through the top 20 quotes in the movie, you know, because you could definitely do that. But they all work so well in context. I think there's only a few moments where I catch myself feeling that it's a little bit too stagey for its own good, you know, and it's always a matter of opinion, you know, it's always to your individual taste. I think there's bits like, you know, the big scene where it's quite an extended scene really, where Margot turns up at the audition and finds that Eve's aced it and gets very, very upset with Bill and everyone else, basically. There's extended scenes where they're yelling at each other across the theatre, where the things they're saying are just so ridiculously artificial that it kind of, it's a bit much, you know, it's like 10% too much, you know.
Yeah, you could argue that, I think. But what I kind of liked about those scenes was that, you know, it was that kind of... It reminded me that there's a... Have you seen... there's a movie called A Taste of Honey? which is like a famous like Manchester set movie, and Morrissey got a lot of his lyrics from.
Sheila Delaney play, wasn't it? That it was based on.
Yeah.
I've not seen that for
Morrissey
ages.
Morrissey was like a huge fan of it, and he got, if you listen to the Smiths albums, you can hear a lot of the dialogue from the films in them. Anyway, so that's what kind of drew me to it. But there's a scene in that where...
Well, if we've learned anything over the last 20 years, it's never question Morrissey's judgment, obviously.
yeah, okay. Yeah, he's always right. Not so good, Al. Anyway, forget all that. Pull the wool over your eyes. But anyway, there's a line in that where the mother and daughter are arguing, and her friend tries to break them up and stop them arguing, and the mother says, "Oh, stop it, we like it." And I just thought that was so brilliant, and that reminded me of that scene All About Eve. It's just the way they function is to be at each other's throats and to let off these huge tirades. And it almost was just for them, like just having a normal conversation almost. So I kind of like that. It certainly didn't feel like this is the first time this has happened. I feel like this is a regular occurrence and it's just getting more and more commonplace. So I kind of liked it. It was almost like a bit frivolous in a way, even though it was, it sounded very, very important and very, very nasty. I thought this is just how these characters function.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I bet Davis particularly, was kind of known even when she was a bit younger for playing quite, for the time, sort of quite flawed characters, not villains necessarily, but quite flawed women, with obvious problems and issues. And I think Margot Channing is that, isn't she? She's I can't remember exactly what George Sanders says, but he describes it at that party scene as like, petulant and envious or petulant and bitter or something, but then says she's magnificent in the same line,
exactly.
She definitely is. I think there's bits. It's so interesting actually, because I know there's been play adaptations of All About Eve, including a fairly recent one, I think in the last 5 years, with Gillian Anderson in the role. I presume they didn't mess around with the script too much for that, although I don't know, I didn't see it, but there's definitely lines where if you were setting it in the modern day, you'd probably update them a little bit, where she's talking about what it's like to be a woman and how basically the age old thing of has she focused too much on a career and got away from what the naturalness of being a woman, or I think it's not quite that simple as it. She talks about the work you need to be a woman, like you need to work at absolutely any aspect of your life, to maintain this veneer. So actually, I mean, I wouldn't say it's aged that badly. I think if you were tweaking it for the modern day, you'd maybe make a few cuts and additions maybe, but not too much. And there's actually quite a lot of there's the old sort of Bechdel test thing about women talk. I forget the exact stipulation, but the women talking to other women for an extended period of time without it being about a man. I think probably a good example of that is the scene where Karen engineers the breakdown of the car and is left alone to talk to Margot, and to the extent that they're talking about someone else. I mean, they mention Bill, I think, but they are basically talking about Eve.
No, that was a great scene. Like, just like it was just so kind of, obviously a ploy. It was just kind of brilliant. And they're stuck in the back of the car, and that was a really good scene, very memorable.
One of the things I really like about the plot structure of All About Eve is that scene directly leads to Eve gaining a bit more of a toehold in the theatre, doesn't it? Because she gets to actually be the understudy. It's one of the big step-up moments where she gets to, because of Margot's absence, because of that car breakdown, she gets to be the understudy on stage for Margot and gets her career elevated further. And that becomes this kind of third act crisis, which all the characters are rallying around, and Addison's review, which is very rude about Margot, becomes this sort of big crisis moment for the characters. But in a sense, it's not really a crisis. It's kind of Karen shown to be doing it for very nice reasons, to set her friend right, basically. And bar a few waves after that, she essentially has set her friend right, and all the characters have had a sense of perspective restored. It kind of it's weird that because it's kind of it diffuses things and kind of undermines the drama of the plot, but in a way that's more satisfying. It gives the characters credit, basically.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily in the way she intended, but it did kind of work out in like a weird, twisted kind of way.
Yeah, it did, and the characters have confrontations with Eve after that, but you are kind of you're left with the exposure of it. Even as Eve gets what she wants, you're left with the exposure of her as essentially quite a pathetic figure, aren't you? Like it's not, and she's not really she's victorious, but not really over them. She gets what she wants, but they're not impeded. In fact, they kind of grow and are happier as a result. Of a kind of letting go. It's in Margot's case.
That's what I found those final scenes quite depressing. Really, just her sort of. I felt like she hadn't really fully escaped. The life. Like when she's there at the award ceremony, and she just looks like so like just world weary and just done and beat, and you're like, you are kind of in this forever. There's no way of escaping it.
Eve, you mean?
And I found that incredibly Margot. Sorry, Margot. I mean.
Okay, yeah. I mean, they're all kind of they've all been through the ringer.
Yeah.
At that awards ceremony, don't they? And Margot's decided to marry Bill, and take a bit of a sort of, I suppose, like a semi-retirement, perhaps, or at least a ramping down of an acceptance of the realistic boundaries for an actress her age,
Yeah, I think the fact that she was even there at all was kind of depressing. You just wanted to like break out of it, and be happy about it. It's like just break free of that life, and because the film was so like damning on the industry, and just I just think that it didn't paint it in a good light whatsoever. It was just like you get into this and you're trapped, you're sort of trapped in this fake kind of like celebrity lifestyle that the media controls, and so again that's another way it was just completely ahead of its time.
Well, I think it's interesting that even the bits you don't see confirmed for you, because watching it again this time, how I said I was going to get around to the scene, but towards the very end of the movie, Eve after that award ceremony, in fact, Eve goes back to her room and Addison visits her, and they have that whole dialogue ending in a kind of terribly apocalyptic argument, basically about her entrapment by him, but in that whole bit, do you remember Eve's talking about how she's basically enticed Lloyd, the playwright, Karen's husband, into leaving Karen for her?
Yeah.
But there's no, unless I'm missing a subtle thing, there's not much evidence in the film that is real. Like there's not evidence that it isn't real, but there's not much evidence that Lloyd actually is leaving Karen for her, and that it's not just something she's telling Addison to get some distance. I think it's probably somewhere in between, actually. I think that in my head canon, it's Lloyd probably has made overtures to her, or she's had a heavy flirtation with him, or that maybe they've had a night together or something, but it's not necessarily as advanced or in the bag as she's making out to Addison. It's something like that, I think.
I think it's that self-fulfilling prophecy thing, like a bit like Singing in the Rain. If she says it's real, then it kind of will become real. It's like she's kind of almost a bit lost in the celeb gossip vibe, that she just thinks that anything that she creates now will kind of come true somehow. At least in the gossip magazines or whatever.
I read it was in that Danny Peary essay, actually, that that was my first exposure to the movie. He talks a little bit about how Anne Baxter, who plays Eve, how she's not as good as, he almost gives her the opposite of the praise he gives to Marilyn Monroe. He says, like, she's kind of outclassed by the actors around her, and her performance is a bit wooden and a bit hollow, but he turns it into a positive. Like he basically says it's exactly the right performance, and it's the sort of performance that allows you to see how hollow Eve is, how shorn of her aspiration, how she's blankly talented in a sense, but there's nothing beyond that. There's none of the animating fire that Margot actually has that make her a rounded person. So she can be a good actress, but she'll never be a good person.
That's what worked, because you believe her. That's why it worked for me, because when Margot is going off on her, you think, even as the audience, you're like, it can't be, like, that's not possible, because Eve's such a good person. You fully believe her backstory and just the way she acts day to day, doing her sort of secretary duties. You just like, there was no point in that as the audience where I thought, yeah, Eve actually is a bitch and is like doing anything bad. And so I think I would agree that if the performance is kind of stilted and like just kind of very natural, that's what made it. It's like that thing, like when she finally turns, it's such a big shock, even though you kind of know it's true, but you kind of like all the way through you're telling yourself it can't possibly be so. It's just not, because she doesn't act that way, So yeah, I think playing them as polar opposites was like, I think that's the strength.
I think I was talking to you about this, and talking if All About Eve was remade, and I think All About Eve, despite the indelibility of Bette Davis's performance and the rest of them, I think All About Eve is the kind of classic you could remake. Maybe more so than things like Casablanca and things, in the sense that it is a really solid script, and that's a lot of its strength. So you can that could carry a new stylistic interpretation of it. But I think I was fantasizing to you about casting like Saoirse Ronan as Eve in a remake, because she's just about the right age where that'd work, and obviously she's brilliant. So
that'd be perfect casting as well, because she can play like a very naturalistic kind of like unsensational character, than what you need. And who would you class as Margot?
Well, I can't. Sorry. Well, I now, because of that recent theatrical thing, I can't really get past Gillian Anderson, but that's a whole other thing about my psyche. But Yeah, I don't know, because you'd need someone probably. You might even need to dial it up a bit so she's even a bit older than Betty Davis in that. Like so she's maybe 50 and over. I think Gillian Anderson's about 50 or slightly older. Because the world has changed. The world is still, to get it clear, the world is still tough for female actors, but not quite as bad as it was in the 1950s. And as you say, there's always television.
Interesting to see that. Yeah, there's always TV where actors go to live. But you could. It'd be very interesting to do a film like this post Me Too as well. The Me Too movement. It'd be very interesting to see how you deal with that, especially like the scenes with Marilyn Monroe are slightly dated in the way that doesn't like he push her towards a producer and say go and be fabulous or something.
Yeah, she's being pimped out essentially. It's polite, but it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the Me Too thing would be fascinating, actually, wouldn't it? Because you could play. I mean, you'd have to do it quite tastefully. Well, you'd have to think about it carefully, but you could do stuff with Eve taking advantage of that kind of thing as well, couldn't you? Like twisting the truth of situations to gain a foothold, and you'd probably have to be even more careful than in the original to not be ragingly sexist, basically, because I think there are. I don't think All About Eve falls into that trap personally, but I think you could definitely look at it as having a bit of a fear of women. There are elements to it.
Yeah.
But saying that, it's got huge sympathy as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I want to talk to you more about that scene where Addison confronts Eve, because I love the because he's been kind of the literally the narrator voice at the intro of the movie, and there's some other bits that he fills in as well. Characters like Karen do a bit of narration as well, but he's been this kind of I'm glad he's on our side kind of presence throughout the movie. Where you're enjoying his wit and his insight and his forked tongue, and even as he acts pretty immorally, you're always prepared to put on Eve. But this is one of those whoever wins we lose moments, isn't it? Where you realise that like. I felt chills this time around, because that Eve is outclassed here, and he's not too slow to put her in a place about that, but he does kind of enjoy reeling her in as well.
It's true your parents were poor, and they still are. They would like to know how you are and where. They haven't heard from you for 3 years.
What of it?
A matter of opinion, granted. It's also true that you worked in a brewery. But life in the brewery was apparently not as dull as you pictured it. In fact, it got less and less dull until your boss's wife had your boss followed by detectives.
She never proved anything, not a thing.
But the $500 you got to get out of town brought you straight to New York, didn't it? That $500 brought you straight to New York, didn't it?
She was a liar. She was a liar!
Answer my question. Weren't you paid to get out of town? There was no Eddie, no pilot. You've never been married. That was not only a lie, it was an insult to dead heroes and the women who loved them. San Francisco has no Schubert Theater. You've never been to San Francisco. That was a stupid lie, easy to expose, not worthy of you.
I had to get in to meet Margot. I had to say something, be somebody, make her like me.
And she did like you. She helped and trusted you. You paid her back by trying to take Bill away.
That's not true.
I was there. I saw you and heard you through the dressing room door. You used my name and column to blackmail Karen into getting you the part of Cora, and you lied to me about it.
No!
I had lunch with Karen not 3 hours ago, as always with women who try to find out things she told more than she learnt. Now, do you want to change your story about Lloyd beating at your door the other night?
Please.
That I should want you at all suddenly strikes me as the height of improbability. But that in itself is probably the reason. You're an improbable person, Eve, and so am I. We have that in common. Also a contempt for humanity, an inability to love and be loved, insatiable ambition and talent. We deserve each other.
There's the earlier scene where he plants the seeds about San Francisco that let him know, with like a couple of lines, let him know that her truth isn't what she says, that her backstory is fabricated. And in this one thing I love about this is that he wins. He for people who haven't seen the movie, he basically subjugates Eve and through threat and blackmail, essentially, to threat of revealing her secrets and everything. He not only tears her away from Lloyd as a love prospect, but also essentially keeps her in servitude, really, doesn't he? In this sort of sexual, romantic, career-based servitude, and you get the feeling that she is trapped in that situation for a good few years, as long as he wants her, basically.
Well, that's what was powerful about that to me, is that, I think it almost changed the I won't say the tone of the film, but like the purpose of the film. At first, I thought was about growing old in the entertainment industry and that, but I think it is essentially more about media control and about or media, just how that these two things go hand in hand. It's like, to build a celebrity, you need this kind of writer, reviews, critics, sort of structure, to make that happen. And that sort of goes for all media. It's kind of like, this one cannot exist without the other. And that's basically what he's saying, is that, I create your life. You don't create. You think you have control of who you're perceived to be, but no longer. I'm the person who builds you and makes you who you are.
Yes,
Don't ever think for a minute that you've got control. And I think in a way that's totally true of like celebrity media. It's like the media do have control of how celebrities are perceived, and that's why you get so many celebrities sort of trying to break out of that, and trying to like say I was so sick of that industry and that kind of sort of false house of cards that was being built around my name, that I just want out and I don't want to be that anymore.
What I really love about that scene is Sanders' portrayal of his essential patheticness, because it's like a showcase for him, and he really takes Eve down, and part of you's cheering because she's kind of the villain of the movie, but you realise that he's a bigger villain, and he's, if anything, even more hollow than her. I really like that line where he's not happy, and even this victory isn't making him happy. Like, I love that she's crying at the end of it, and he's decimated her, really, but he has that line where he's like, that I should want you at all now seems like the height of absurdity, and it's kind of
oh god, yeah.
He's just not even that into it, it's just all he knows how to do. Like, he's just clawing at these possessions that he has, which is so meager and clearly not doing anything for him spiritually. And I actually like the way, because it's a very camp performance, George Sanders in general, and he was a very camp performer. And I actually like the ambiguity that if you think of Addison as gay, which obviously wouldn't be tremendously out of character for a theatre critic, it's not even sexual, really, or if it is, he's forcing himself. Like, I like the idea that he really doesn't want it even that way. He's just so twisted and empty that he just wants to possess her and stop her being anything else. He's just.
I think some of the best villains and characters in movies like that, that are so sinister, are better when they are kind of completely what's the word, kind of non-sexual, in a way, a bit like. In There Will Be Blood, when Daniel Plainview and is it Henry Plainview are in the whorehouse, and Daniel is not, interested in in partaking at all. He's just kind of sat off to the side, just like brooding. It's like there's no point in that film where he ever lusts after women in any way, and it makes him kind of just more sinister that that's not even a motivation. Because for most people that's usually a motivation of some kind, but to him it's not, and that makes him harder to understand, and you always fear what you can't understand.
I was, even as a teenager seeing this movie for the first time, I was overjoyed to hear George Sanders, because I had seen him in a couple of other minor roles, I think, but I basically knew him, like a lot of kids, as the voice of Shere Khan from Disney's The Jungle Book, which he actually did.
Yeah, I had that.
I think that was like a good 15, 16 years after this, wasn't it? But I read in researching for this podcast, I read that George Sanders published a memoir in 1960. 10 years after All About Eve, which was called Memoirs of a Professional Cad. And I really want to track down a copy of that. Preferably in audiobook form, actually. He probably didn't record it.
Make a poster Jungle Book. You could be Memoirs of a Professional Cat.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah,
Bully.
He'd be a great sat-nav voice if he still existed, George Sanders, wouldn't he? He was
yeah. I think he's got the most. It's a voice you never forget, especially when you binged on Disney movies as much as we did when we were kids.
Oh, definitely, quite a get for Disney, really, in the mid '60s. When they were just dabbling in the sort of celebrity voice casting stuff that would later become their bread and butter. It's it's very successful early use of that. I think part of the reason I'm reading these kind of qualities onto Addison is he's a great character, but it's also George Sanders had a famously unhappy life for a lot of it, and an end, so there's that kind of melancholy and that trapped by showbiz nature. There's something that he and Betty Davis in different ways. They both embody that, don't they? They both lived that. They both lived the difficulties and stresses of showbiz. And I think All About Eve is such a great showcase for them and the interactions of those actors. I don't think it's aged as much as it should have done in some ways.
Yeah. There was very little, in it that made me, feel uncomfortable or cringe. There was that one Marilyn Monroe scene where she was sort of pushed towards the guy, but that was kind of more just to tell to me that, like, like they said, when the Me Too movement started, like, all these sort of veteran actresses said, like, well, this has been going on for hundreds of years, this is not a new thing, and that just shows you that it was an open secret. It's like, it was in films, it was shown like there, it's like, how much clearer did it need to be?
Yeah, and then again, you just get reinforced the sort of sad hollowness of Eve's victory, don't you? Because she's a victor in the sense that she's pushed herself forward as new chattel, basically. She's volunteered for the banquet. She's the dish of the day.
Yeah. That's why I love that end scene so much, because it's almost like Eve knows herself, when she sees the new girl come in, and she's just like, that's the great moment, because she really sees herself for what she is, and then it just, so it was a really downbeat ending, which I always quite enjoy in movies, actually, especially when movies like that call for it, and they are quite bleak throughout, it's just to have that kind of, this is just a cycle that's just going to keep going and going and going, like there's very little you can do about it, because it's so appealing.
It's a nice ending, isn't it? It arguably slightly overdoes the cyclical nature of it, because it's almost cartoonish. A sort of a very Eve-like woman showing up on a very similar night. Like less than a year on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's
not subtle.
No, it's not subtle. But I love that. I do love that final shot of the new young actress in sort of trapped in the mirrors. Like in a sort of hall of mirrors, admiring her own reflection, but bouncing back at herself as well. It's really beautiful, and in a movie that isn't very showy, like it's not got the Citizen Kane directorial flair or anything in that sense. Not to do down Mankiewicz or anything, but just it's not that kind of movie. You're not coming to it for the flashy shots and the effects and everything, and that's why it works quite well as a little cherry on top at the end there. Definitely,
yeah. It's probably one of the most complex shots visually, definitely.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you enjoyed it. It was a nice. It's good to go back and chat about older movies. I think especially All About Eve is for those who've seen it. It's this well regarded favourite, but it's also just got the kind of respectability of an old cinema classic and a multiple Oscar winner. So it's the sort of thing that will get by younger film fans, and by I'm not looking down at anyone there. I mean us. It will tend to get overlooked a little bit sometimes, and because it's just so canonical. It's not worth standing up for. It doesn't need defenders. But then these films will, because it's 70 years old now, All About Eve. So
wow.
Yeah. So these films will just pass out of the popular consciousness eventually. And this. It's important to keep rediscovering them and to bring fresh takes on them. And that's one reason I think remakes are good, basically, is that I don't, and that's ironic because in preparing for talk about Peter Jackson, we were mutually rubbishing the King Kong remake last night.
Yeah.
But I think it's good these things happen.
Well, I heard a good argument recently that's like, there's been hundreds of thousands of productions of Macbeth, and that's not frowned upon, and that's essentially a remake. Every production of Macbeth is directed differently with different actors, different sets, things like that, and that's lauded. Whereas and so I agree. The Fly is a remake. That's the other thing. Wizard of Oz is a remake. It's like the Maltese Falcon.
Well, the Fly is the way you win that argument straight away, really, isn't it? Like for anyone who cares about it.
It's probably the best go-to. Yeah, definitely. The Fly, The Thing. It's like, it's really, it's that thing of where, remakes should not be. I understand that, why. The problem with remakes is the purpose of being, really, isn't it? It's like they're either made to be pre-sold, a pre-sold title to make money, or they're remade because someone thinks they've got a different, spin to put on the story. Yeah. And it's like, it just depends why. Like The Invisible Man was fantastic like that. It just came out this year. I absolutely loved that, and that was a remake very much. There's just been announced Ryan Gosling is starring in a Wolfman remake that's meant to be a sort of Nightcrawler style thing where a journalist gets attacked, at night while working, and that's really intriguing. I'm looking forward to that. I think it is a Universal production, so might be a higher budget kind of studio affair, but hopefully it'll be half decent.
Yeah, I was saying to you, I did watch The Invisible Man recently, by the way, and this is out with the bounds of this podcast, but for anyone who's seen that, I basically thought it was good for about the first third and not so good afterwards. That's my summary to that.
Yeah.
But you were talking about The Wolfman.
I've got a lot to say about it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely worthy of another podcast. I haven't even seen the 2010 Benicio del Toro Wolfman yet, although I just found out yesterday that Emily Blunt's in it, so that's that might go on the list.
Is it? Yeah, she's probably. I mean, the act. It's one of those things. It's like, good actors with a terrible script and a terrible production. One of the best summaries I heard. I listened to a Rick Baker podcast recently. He's retired now. He's for people who don't know, he's like the sort of Mr. Makeup, special effects. He did all the makeup for American Werewolf, Men in Black, like hundreds and hundreds of movies, and he's a true genius. And he was hired to produce and do the makeup for The Wolfman 2010. Mm-hmm. And apparently on the first day of production, the producer came in and said, "What's all this hair for? Why are you ordering all this hair?" And he's like, so there you go.
Yeah, I mean,
that sums it up. Read into that.
Yeah, that's not so good. Oh, just before we move on from All About Eve, I did have one thing in my notes I wanted to mention, which was just I was watching it. I had it on the telly the other day, and Lucy asked if the music score in All About Eve was done by the same person who'd done Gone with the Wind over 10 years before that, because there's a little motif in it that sounds very like the Gone with the Wind theme, and it wasn't.
Well spotted.
Yeah, well, it wasn't. It was a good point, because it does sound a lot like it, but it wasn't done by the same person who did the score. It was done by a bloke called Alfred Newman. But in reading up about that, I found out that Alfred Newman, who did the score for All About Eve, he did many films actually. Again, like Mankiewicz, he had this quite storied Hollywood career, but he composed to order the fanfare for 20th Century Fox.
Really?
So every time you've heard that da, 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 like after anything, before anything, including Alien, The Simpsons, tons of stuff that's in our DNA, that's him. Yeah, basically, that's Alfred Newman.
Wow, that's. I mean, you can't get like a wider reach than that, can you?
That's kind of like one of the jingles of the 20th century, really, isn't it? Like that's one of the defining ones.
Well, that's as much as Star Wars theme to me, as John Williams' score is, because that to me, like I think I was saying to you a few days ago, it was really jarring to me when the sequel Star Wars movies came out and they didn't have the 20th Century Fox fanfare at the beginning. Yeah. I was kind of like, I wish they'd kind of licensed it to them, because it just is part of the ramping up to watch a Star Wars movie. That's how influential that is.
Yeah, I hadn't even really thought about that till you mentioned it, but yeah, that's I mean, those movies have other problems, obviously, but that was one of them. That might help a bit.
That was the sequel trilogy's biggest problem for me.
I'm honestly still. It's too soon for me to talk about Rise of Skywalker. I don't have any particular energy to, but that is one of the most boring times I've ever spent in the cinema.
Yeah. Last Jedi was the most frustrating, and Rise of Skywalker was the most dull. But I have to say,
I'd take The Last Jedi over Rise of Skywalker. Like, I mean, it was at least there was stuff going on, and even the stuff I didn't like about it was, there were interesting choices going on, even if I didn't think all of them worked. Rise of Skywalker was dross.
I've got so much to say about this, but I think Rise of Skywalker made me less angry, so I'm going to take Rise of Skywalker over the other one. Plus, just to see Ian McDermott read the phone book, which he might as well have done.
Yeah. I would have preferred that. Yeah.
Mrs. A. Kinnick, London S12. Complete. That would have been great. Yeah,
that's our next project. Okay, well, after that very thorough and on-point discussion of All About Eve, we'll just take a short break now, and then we'll come back and talk about Meet the Feebles.
Spectacular.
Welcome back to the EscapeGoat podcast, and I'm now going to turn to discussing a film with Matt that to be honest, before the time I started this podcast, I knew we were going to have to end up talking about, because I think apart from anything else, it is still a little bit, it's bold to make this claim for anything, isn't it? But it's a little bit under-examined still, I'd say, critically. And those people who have examined it tend to write it off quite easily, and me and Matt are both fans. Talking about 1989's Meet the Feebles, the second feature film by Peter Jackson.
So you got Bad Taste first, and then Meet the Feebles, then Brain Dead, which is a kind of a strange order, because I always assumed it might be like Bad Taste, Brain Dead, Meet the Feebles, or something like, because but I wasn't ever quite sure of the order there, but yeah, that's the order in which they were produced.
Would you like to explain to the audience who, it's very realistic that they might not have seen this, would you like to explain to them briefly what Meet the Feebles is, and also how you first saw it?
So fans of Lord of the Rings might not even know that Peter Jackson had this early career in basically exploitation horror films. You could label Meet the Feebles is more of a dark comedy with puppets. It's basically a spoof of the Muppet Show, with these characters called the Feebles, who are trying to put on a show, and in a sort of studio setting, and it's basically about all the hijinks, the sort of dirty, underhanded black market criminal hijinks of these characters. So it's basically like an adult Muppet movie.
Yeah, and it's I think people who've seen the musical, I haven't actually, but people who've seen the musical Avenue Q might recognise elements of that. That was after Meet the Feebles, obviously, and I'm not sure how directly inspired they were by it, but the same sort of, Muppets Gone Bad kind of poster line almost you might use for that is the case. Do you remember when you first saw Meet the Feebles?
I was just thinking that I remember, in terms of Peter Jackson's early films, I remember buying Brain Dead on VHS the night I went to see Phoenix TX in 2002, which was my second ever live gig that I ever went to, and that's a really vivid memory. And I think it had to be after that, because I think that Brain Dead was actually the first of the Peter Jackson horror movies that I saw. I think it was in this order. I think it was Brain Dead, Bad Taste, and then Meet the Feebles. But I think it was probably 2003. It was probably like a year after, because I think as soon as I saw Brain Dead and just absolutely adored it, everything about it, I had to find out, about these other films, and probably seeked out Bad Taste and Meet the Feebles shortly after. Can you remember?
Well, I was going to say you might have seen my VHS copy of it, because it probably was about 2002 or something. I had also seen Brain Dead and Bad Taste, and I sought out Meet the Feebles, and I remember I had to buy an import VHS. I can't even quite remember how I got hold of it. It might have been Amazon or a proto Amazon type website, but I got hold of the VHS that luckily worked in the player we had. But it was it's this like bizarre, lurid kind of almost like 1940s looking kind of illustrated cover with Heidi the Hippo and Bletch the Walrus and some of the other Feebles characters on it. And I don't think I knew too much about it. I knew the puppet gimmick, but I didn't really know much about it beyond that. And I absolutely lapped it up, and it was very much one of those things, we've talked about these before, but one of those like late night VHSs that I used to watch, probably after 11 o'clock at night, into the early hours of the morning in my teenage bedroom, that just seemed like your own contained world. Like, I was talking to someone recently about how Cabaret was a movie like that for me, and actually it's a funny comparison to make, because obviously there's, amongst its other similarities, this is a kind of closed world film, isn't it? A cabaret, the self-enclosed cabaret show, although it's a mixture of puppet work and costume work. There's some costume performers playing the larger characters, just as there are in the Muppets. But I don't think, other than that you, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think you see any humans in Meet the Feebles.
No, there's no like human characters at all, is there? It's all puppets.
There's no indication whether the world they live in is our world or a version of our world, or is just devoid of humans. Even the location filming they did in like New Zealand, there's these like abandoned cityscapes basically, and
that whole scene with Mr. Big, who is like a giant whale creature thing that like comes out things. There's definitely no human characters in it, or I don't think you see a human being at all. So I guess you're led to think that the whole world is these kind of puppet characters. I remember you watching movies like, when we were growing up, from sort of like 98 to like 2004, like in your bedroom you had this little video combi thing where you'd And there'd always, every time I went to visit you in your room, like to play some computer games or whatever, I just remember there'd be like a horrendous movie on, like something like Blue Velvet or Meet the Feebles or Bad Taste or, you know, something just. And I remember just always looking over at this combi and thinking, like, you know, I need to watch some of these films because they always looked so amazingly dark and interesting. And I think it's only years later that I became such a film fanatic that I, you know, started discovering these movies, and I always sort of would say to you, "Oh, have you seen Blue Velvet?" And you know, I'd say, "Oh yeah, I used to watch that all the time." Like, you know, so it's you obviously had your stage of really sort of getting through these films.
Yeah, it runs both ways with younger and older brothers, because I probably had the thing where I'd pop in and see you playing the PlayStation 1 and be like, what Bandicoot? What's the Bandicoot's name?
Yeah, Crash. Yeah.
What's his motivation?
Yeah.
I needed, you know, which is equally valid. I mean, I remember that period just so nostalgic for me, and just kind of that between about 13 and 16, probably, like if you to generalize that's probably, even though I did a film degree at university, so obviously I watched a lot of movies then, but I possibly watched more movies between 13 and 16.
Yeah.
Like that was just ridiculous. Like if you to enumerate them, that's I was just mainlining movies.
It's a great education, and as you said, it was pre-internet. And I think it's, you know, any movies that you either bought or you recorded off late night, you know, Channel 4 or something like that, you know, like you said before, it was like they kind of felt like only you had seen them in some way. They didn't feel like public domain. They felt like something that, you know, was just your experience. And when it is something as dark as that, you know, like a horror film or, you know, a David Lynch movie or something, or a Peter Jackson movie, it must have felt really isolating for you somehow. Like, you know, these are movies that only I have seen.
In a nice way, yeah. In a nice teenage way, where you kind of, that's partly what you want, yeah. And you're carving out your own space culturally. Like, I think that's, you know, because me and Matt have talked before how about we grew up with fairly liberal parents, especially in terms of viewing. Although they had their limits. Obviously, there was stuff they kept from us till a certain age and stuff. But we grew up with Dad showing us Monty Python and things like that. But there was something about, I mean, there were other movies that like this, of course, but there's something about Meet the Feebles where it's something you knew Dad wouldn't really be into.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it was a new level, wasn't it? Like it was a new level of like crudity, and you know, it's quite sleazy. It's quite a sleazy movie. I don't mean that as an attack on it.
Yeah, it's something you wouldn't show your parents. It was just a step too far, sort of thing. So like then it becomes your own. Like you said, it becomes your thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, also we saw it, as you were saying, the early noughties, so it would be after, you know, Lord of the Rings, the trilogy was probably still in the cinemas when I watched this, and it was kind of, so there was that awareness of Peter Jackson, and even at that stage, it was like, what did he do? Like, sorry, what is this like history I'm putting together? You know, because it's really, I mean, if you haven't watched Meet the Feebles and you're listening to this, firstly, I'm envious of you, but also do watch it, or watch a bit, even just watch a bit of it, because the aesthetics of it are just crazy. You know, like it will be unlike anything you've seen before, really, I'd say.
Peter Jackson does amazing things with a limited budget, and I think that, you know, the budget on this was probably, you know, I mean, you know, from reading what I've read, it was, you know, it was actually such a low budget and so tightly squeezed that when they tried to complete the movie and film the Vietnam War scenes, the cast and crew actually put money towards that, so they actually ended up financing their own movie just to get it finished. And then when it came out, it made not even like half its money back at the box office. I think it cost something like $750,000, and it grossed something like 80,000. So it didn't do well, you know, at all. But I mean, that's just, I guess, what gave
This is the Vietnam segment of the film, isn't it? Where I think had the working title "The Frogs of War."
Yeah.
Did you tell me they were going to make that whole segment as like its own project? It was like its own short movie, and that's why it seems kind of slightly in a nice way. It seems slightly out of place in the middle of the movie.
I think that was actually more of a financial, like it was like remortgaging your house. Like they had to claim that this was a new movie that they were doing. They were moving on from Feebles and making a war movie that was like way more racist and way more like risky, you know, just to get the funds to complete it. But you know, there's something like that, you know, it was some kind of like, you know, a monetary decision to do that. But obviously it ended up being part of
the no pun intended, I like the feebleness of that as a dodge as well. Like you go, don't worry, we're not making this stupid Meet the Feebles movie anymore. We are making another puppet movie.
We're making a frog Vietnam movie that's really racist and like awful.
Sold.
Yeah, so we'll get for completion funds for that.
Yeah. It is quite racist, that segment. I do. I was trying to say reclaiming things about it, and I mean, it's funny as well because I mean, it does have the Vietnamese having like ridiculously detailed kind of Maoism seminars and stuff around the campfires and stuff, which is really funny.
But that's the only reason that because I don't want to judge it too harshly because obviously there are some every character is kind of a stereotype in this movie, the way it's constructed, the puppet and stuff. But
there's enough hatred to go around in this movie.
It's a really hateful movie. But those scenes, like you said, I think there's an intelligence there that realizes that this is exploitation. It's not exploitation; it's faux exploitation. It's post exploitation. And that's kind
everyone is trashed in this movie, and every single like unflattering or misogynist depiction of a woman they have in it, they have equally unflattering, terrible portrayals of male behaviour and excess. And
nobody is safe.
No one really comes out of it clean. I suppose you could say the nearest thing to a protagonist and nice person the movie has is Robert the Hedgehog, who is actually funny. Talk about All About Eve before. He's probably the nearest thing to an Eve figure, except he's actually nice. He's Eve as she claims to be.
Robert gets upset at his future bride for having a drink. Isn't he? Like he curses her for being an alcoholic because she has one glass of champagne or something like that. That's how clean Robert is.
Oh yeah, he's quite prudish and judgmental as well, in a low key way. But he's a shining star compared to everyone else. I've just thought, I hadn't thought about this at all. But we keep mentioning the Muppets as a kind of token thing for it. One thing Robert's actually a bit like is like Walter in the 2011 Muppets movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, he really is actually, and that's. I wouldn't doubt if the producers of the Muppet movie, the most recent pair of Muppet movies, hadn't seen Meet the Feebles at some point. At least someone in the production. Being Brett and the Flight of the Conchords being producers and songwriters for the Muppet movies as well. So there is a New Zealand connection there.
Oh, of course. Well, I'd be very surprised if the Conchords hadn't seen Meet the Feebles. Yeah. I imagine that was just a coming of age for everyone.
Are you sure that this is a good idea?
She'll love it. Go on, do your stuff.
You are my amour, what I adore, oh Lucy. This is the way that I must say how my heart feels. Oh Lucille, oh Lucille, oh Lucille, oh Lucille.
Keep going. It's magic.
Under the light of the Spanish moon, it is for love that I croon this tune. Lucille, Lucille, Lucille.
It's funny actually. There was there's a few voice actors in Meet the Feebles. I think there's a male actor who does the voice of both Robert and Heidi the Hippo, actually, and there's a different male actor who does the voice of Bletch the Walrus, and that latter actor at least was in a New Zealand show called Shortland Street, like a soap opera.
Yeah.
So he would have been quite a well-known voice then.
Wow.
And I think several of the voice actors go on to be in other Peter Jackson movies as well. I was reading one of the main voice actors went on to be one of the dwarves in The Hobbit.
Oh yes, it was he the one who played Heidi. He's the guy who played Heidi, and he went on to be in King Kong and Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, or just The Hobbit.
Yeah, he's one of the dwarfs in The Hobbit, maybe in King Kong. Mark Hadlow is the name of the guy who voiced Robert and Heidi, and also Barry the Bulldog. Peter Vere Jones is the guy who voiced Bletch the Walrus, and also Arthur, actually, and he went on to be the Undertaker in Braindead, as well as some other stuff.
I thought I recognised he's got probably the most recognisable voice, hasn't he? And that's what I think of as like the Peter Jackson voice, as in like the voice that's most kind of memorable, and just the performances in this. I mean, we'll get into this, I'm sure, but that's what makes this movie so great, is that it's cheap and it's exploitive. It's an exploitation movie in as much as it's a parody of one, but it's really well put together. All the performances are amazing. All the costumes and the puppets are just so well made considering the budget. There's nothing unbelievable about this film. nothing unsincere anyway.
No, well, okay, yeah, kind of. Yeah, we'll get into that. I before we move on to the voice actors, I was just going to say Stuart Forbes Devaney is one of the other voice actors. He plays Sebastian the Fox, who's directing the show.
He's great as well,
and as well as Dr. Quack, actually, which is fantastic. But
how
Stuart,
are we feeling, Harry?
yeah, it's so amazing. Stuart Devaney was actually a New Zealand theatre director, so he was known in that world as he's basically playing himself as Sebastian the Fox almost.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, it really is. It was praising the score of All About Eve before on rewatch, because I watched this me and Matt both rewatched this about a week ago, Meet the Feebles, and I hadn't seen it for some years. I think probably about 4 or 5 years maybe. And I really like the score for this, and I think because I always remember Garden of Love,
yeah,
and obviously the Meet the Feebles introduction theme is really great as well. But it's actually got a few good songs scattered through it. Like, is it the One Leg Missing song that they do about a third of the way through? It's actually really great. Like, it's a really great kind of rock and roll boogie kind of pastiche.
So it is a musical as well, basically. It is a musical comedy horror drama.
Yeah, and it's like Cabaret in the sense that all the songs are, diegetic, would you say? They're all within the world of the performance and of the show and of the rehearsal, and they function at introducing you to more and more of the characters and the sort of like slightly nonsensical show. But I mean, it's only as nonsensical as like an average Muppet show would have been.
It'd be great at this point to mention Robert's Serenade of Lucille. That's another great song. Whereas is it what's the Arthur the earthworm? He's one of the sort of handyman, I guess, of the set.
Gives him a pep talk, and then he really goes for it.
And he takes
Under the light of the silvery moon.
Yeah, he takes his ukulele and goes and like serenades Lucille. But they're really memorable songs. It's this kind of thing. Is like, it's easy to look down on it, but none of it is badly made. It's like, all the songs are really good, and all the production of the music is great. It's done very, very well.
I like that Guppy that tries to audition for Bletch and gets devoured. But even he's got a little song. It's just not a very well thought through one.
Bletch puke him up about half an hour later. You get to see him again.
Just when you've forgotten how awful it was in the first place. Yeah, and he just expires.
I think I've got a cavity in a rear molar. Do you mind checking it for me? He just eats him.
He's got a fantastic voice, that actor. I think. One bit I'd completely, talk about the show, bits of the Meet the Feebles show you forget about. I'd completely forgotten that they have that bit where the Bulldog's doing Don Giovanni, with full operatic flair and like all the military, all like cannons going off and stuff like that. And because he's like really going for it.
You just assume he's just the muscle of the set, don't you, until that point? But he's got this real artistic, they're like, oh, what the hell was wrong with that? He gets like before.
Yeah, he reverts to this sort of like Sub Ray Winston sort of type, but he's got this massive operatic voice,
Oh, amazing!
And like, why is that? It's kind of like with the Muppets, like, why is that part of the show? Yeah. Why are they crowbarring that in?
Yeah.
But it's done so full-throatedly and full-heartedly, isn't it? It makes it all the funnier. One of the reasons I have put this together as a sort of double bill of discussion was obviously on a very, very basic level. You could characterize Meet the Feebles as being like All About Eve in the sense that at its heart, it's got the story of this aging actress who is jealous of a younger replacement and has a relationship with a sort of powerful male in the theatre world. And one thing, when we talked about All About Eve, I was saying that in a very mature way, All About Eve essentially lets our heroes escape the plot. They're able to kind of do the right thing and gain a sense of perspective and rise above it all and do that. Meet the Feebles is fascinating, isn't it? Because it's a very different film, obviously a very different mood, a very different tone, a hugely different audience, but it's a different kind of escape, isn't it, for Heidi? Because she doesn't exactly rise above it, but she definitely gives as good as it gets. And for anyone who hasn't seen Meet the Feebles, one of the most memorable things about it is that it essentially ends with a massacre. From about the last 10 to 15 minutes are Heidi, who's had a tremendous amount of emotional pressure and ridiculous humiliation heaped on her throughout the movie, and has basically been let go from the show like after this last performance, is trying to commit suicide via Gatling gun, basically, isn't she? Which is a ridiculous conceit anyway. And then she she's pushed one step too far by the young ingenue who's been cheating on Bletch, against her, and she just absolutely lets rip and destroys this small cat puppet. And then she, if that wasn't funny enough, she spends like the last 10 minutes essentially rampaging through the entire theatre and including onto the stage. She swings onto the stage. There's this, it's a guy playing hiding, but like this massive actor in a hippo costume like swings onto the stage with a Gatling gun. And the
I wish I could have been present on set when that was being filmed, like the multiple takes of that entrance. Swinging through the
Oh no, that'd be great. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of in a different way. It's a bit of a dry run for the Grand Guignol kind of finale of Braindead, isn't it? You know, because that's equally, you know, that's funny and gets funnier the more you just can't believe it. You can't believe it's happening.
Yeah,
you know, it's still going on.
That's legendary amongst zombie fans. You know, like how the lawnmower is just just a great scene. That's the first thing, you know, when I was sort of getting into zombie films and stuff. I remember like a friend coming up to me and saying, "Have you seen the one where the guy, you know, takes out the zombies at the end with the lawnmower?" And I was like, "No." And that's the introduction to that film. It's like, "Oh yeah, he takes out like 100 zombies," and it delivered. You know, when I watched it, you know, I'd had all these kind of like images and thoughts in my head of how it was going to be executed, and it was better than I could have imagined. You know, it was just exactly what you would have wanted. But yeah, the massacre at the end is it's brilliant because it's the first part where she's going room to room, you know, dressing room to dressing room, like executing all the people with the Gatling gun, and in the background, Sebastian, the producer, has jumped onto the stage to perform his song "Sodomy," and so in the background there's this song all about sodomy. She's like cutting everyone down.
It's a really gleeful endorsement of sodomy as well. You know,
yeah,
like,
really happy, and you got that as a montage.
Song.
Like you get the image of Heidi going and killing everyone in this dress, like, hippo in a dress and loads of lipstick, just like going around killing. It's just you know,
that's my favorite bit. I like a lot of bits in this movie. That's my favorite bit. Like effortlessly, like that. I just think there's something still so great about that.
It's so well put together, and as you're watching it, it's just your mouth's just agape when you're watching it. You're just like, it just gets better and better, and it's so well put together. Like as I said before, you know, it's amazing what they did with, like, you know, this is essentially an independent movie, you know, and it's just like, you know, anyone making an independent movie just like, you know, has to watch stuff like this just because they've set the standard so high.
Yeah, well, and using that bit, following that bit, they use the power of the reprise as well, don't they? Like for the score, because they both give you the Meet the Feebles introductory theme again just before Heidi bursts through onto the stage, but also they give you Garden of Love, which is the sort of torch song that Heidi's been rehearsing like about halfway through the movie, and they have a disastrous rehearsal for it, which is one of her humiliations, you know. But then it comes back at the end after the massacre. She's kind of allowed to sing it by Arthur, the sort of kindly theatre manager, you know, what would you call him, theatre manager kind of type.
Yeah, manager guy.
While the police are on their way, basically, so she gets this one last moment in the limelight and this melancholic song, you know, which is actually quite beautiful. You know, I don't know who wrote it, but it's actually lovely. She sings that, and that's my second favourite bit, and then she's still singing that over the end credits.
Miss Heidi, I know you're a real star and all that, but I'm afraid I'm gonna have to dob you in.
Could you do one last thing for me, Arthur?
Anything, Miss Heidi.
Play the Garden of Love.
On a magic night, when the way you feel is a mystery, it will be revealed. Could be an angel from up above, with a flower from the garden, a garden of love. Garden of love. On another day, it may come again. It's a Valentine from a special friend.
Me and Matt talked about this a while back. The end credits do that kind of true crime story, almost like O.J. Simpson, you know, type thing of saying like where the characters are now, you know, treating them like real characters who survived, you know, the ones who survived the massacre. It tells you what went on to to happen to them. And me and Matt were talking a few years ago about how a great follow-up to Meet the Feebles would be a documentary, quote documentary about the Feebles massacre, the Feebles Theatre massacre, where you catch up, where you're basically like an investigative reporter trying to do a Citizen Kane and kind of go around and like find out the truth, and because Heidi the hippo is shown to be in witness protection, essentially. You know, she adopts a new identity as like a checkout lady, and you know, you're trying to track her down. I'm just imagining all the ridiculous stuff you could do with puppets and like actual human actors running around as hippos and like darting out of the view of the camera and stuff.
I really hope that someone, you know, has suggested that to Peter Jackson, like, because, you know, I think as it's just such a wonderful cult classic, and for it does leave it directly open for that kind of sequel documentary, you know, to be made. And I think if no one else has suggested it to him, I think me and you should get on a plane to New Zealand pretty soon and get a pitch together.
Yeah, like literally, we need like, I don't know, we give us like $20,000 and like all the puppets basically and a van, and we'll make that for you.
Yeah,
you know, it'll be like a weekend. You know, we'll make something worth watching.
And you'd like to think that you know, it might appeal to, you know, because there's a good chance that nobody has suggested anything like this to him. You know, because he's, you know, going to have so many super fans of Lord of the Rings and, you know, of the King Kong and the Hobbit and all of his other, you know, sort of blockbuster movies that, you know, these movies are essentially kind of forgotten about. Although I watched an interview with Peter Jackson done recently, and he actually said that they're going to release them on 4K Blu-ray pretty soon. So they are actually rescanning the original negatives of Bad Taste, Brain Dead, and Meet the Feebles, and they're going to release them simultaneously. So hopefully in the next 6 months or so, we should get to see them in better quality than we've ever seen them before.
Oh, that's so fantastic! I'd love to see that, just for the novelty. Because I'm not a Blu-ray person, so I'd love to get a Blu-ray player, and my first Blu-ray be the 4K Meet the Feebles, just some sort of weird statement.
He also said on that.
I was
he said
say,
on the same interview. Sorry to interrupt. He mentioned in passing on the interview I was watching was for his World War I documentary that he did recently, where they you know, remastered all the original World War I footage and made it up to speed and colorized it, and it just looked real. You know, it looked like incredible footage. And he actually said he put he took time just on his own in the studio on his downtime to put the original you know, negatives of Meet the Feebles into this process in the studio and clean it up. And he actually sat there watching, you know, Meet the Feebles in this kind of like, you know, new remastered, up to speed frame rate version of Meet the Feebles. So can you imagine sitting there in, like, you know, the most, like, you know, advanced production house watching, you know, literally a lifelike version of Meet the Feebles on a huge screen? It'd be incredible.
God, that must be so surreal as well when you're a filmmaker who's been going that long and you're watching something from, you know, nearly, I guess when he did that, but nearly 20 years ago. Just this bizarre thing that you did at a whole different life stage.
Yeah, it must be crazy. I mean, it's 30 years ago now, isn't it? 31 years.
Well, 89. So yeah, getting on for it. You know, you're right. Because I mean, Peter Jackson even made. When I was reading up about this, I remembered that when Peter Jackson was getting he was getting Oscars mostly for the final Lord of the Rings movies, wasn't he? That was the one that kind of cleaned up. And he made reference to Meet the Feebles in his acceptance speech. I think he referred to it as being rightly overlooked by the Academy. It's nice.
So great to have that in your back catalogue.
I love it. For anyone who's not, I actually want to talk about this more at length as some other podcasts, but for anyone who's not seen the early Peter Jackson movies, there's one that notably falls in between the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the kind of schlock horror trilogy that we're talking about, but the called Heavenly Creatures, which some people have seen. I know it's notable for being, I think if not the first, a very early Kate Winslet movie. It's definitely one of her first, and it's about two New Zealand schoolgirls who have a very intense friendship, which leads to like a very detailed fantasy world and also violence. I won't say any more than that, but I think it's very well worth watching for anyone who hasn't seen it. And it's sort of it's very dark. It's very dark. Like it's almost like there was something like The Butcher Boy. You know, it's as like a non-romantic vision of childhood.
Oh, I love The Butcher Boy. That's a great film.
Yeah, The Butcher Boy's great.
That's a good recommend, actually. I saw a movie. I've seen Heavenly Creatures and The Butcher Boy, and I also was doing a bit of research on the director Bernard Rose, who did Candyman, which is one of my favourite horror films. And he made a movie just before Candyman called Paper House, and which is you know, again, nobody's seen it, but it's like it's similarly basically the same thing. Like a girl who is like, you know, and sort of confined to a London flat, like draws like a house in a notebook, and it becomes like part of her dream world and stuff, and she can affect what's going on, and she's got like an absentee father, and it's very, very dark. One of these movies that really, sort of crosses those boundaries of like, is this a movie intended for children to watch, or is it more of like a teenage adult movie? But it's quite brilliant, and I think it would speak to kids and adults alike.
That's interesting. I'll check that one out. I've
Yeah,
not seen
really
that.
worth a look. It's really dark.
It's interesting that what you say about speaking to children and adults in terms of movies like this, because I on this watching Meet the Feebles, I say I hadn't seen it for about 4 or 5 years, and the last time I watched it, I think we were all having beers, and it was a kind of group setting. It was kind of we were all all comfortably in our late 20s, by then, but like it was a bit of a lads' party kind of atmosphere, and this and even then I remember. So this would be about 2015 or 16. I remember having a slight queasiness watching Meet the Feebles because I was having less patience for some of the sort of OTT gross out humour that makes up quite a lot of it, really. And I had that again, and I don't mean this to condemn it whatsoever. I would recommend people watch this movie, but I was just realising, I was sort of self-analysing basically like how I am now a different person and how I'm not a teenage boy anymore. And because I really, really love the climax of Meet the Feebles, and I like bits of, I think that still really, really works, and I love like the bits like the Vietnam sequence. I think are still brilliant. I mean, for the Lyndon Johnson is very bad egg sign alone. That's still hilarious. I think what I was just realising is because I'm a bit older now, I've talked to you before about how now I find like the Itchy and Scratchy cartoons in The Simpsons, I actually find a little bit upsetting, and it's just because you get you get older and you get more squeamish, or like a lot of people get older, they get more squeamish, and like the idea of like hurt and extreme violence becomes a little bit more real. Even if you've led quite a comfortable life like I have, the idea of getting hurt is just not quite as funny innately, And I had a thing with Meet the Feebles this time where I appreciate that the cumulative grossness and nastiness and sort of dark cynicism of the whole movie leads up and allows you to have that massacre at the end and that vent and that garden of love, semi-serious melancholy. It's just I don't have as much stomach for it anymore. I just can't. I admire it, but I just can't. I don't think it's even this bad or aged badly. Even really, it's just I'm not all in for it anymore. And there's nothing. That's not the movie's fault. It's just It's just.
I would imagine that would just make the cumulative effect greater in a way, because it just makes it more extreme. But the takeaway I get from it is just that I think it's that thing of you're watching a film that's about like bad puppets and and puppets being very horrible and taking drugs and committing crimes and murder and stuff, and then you have this really sentimental, heartfelt song at the end, sung by someone who is at the end of their rope, and it pulls on your heartstrings. I think suspension of disbelief just comes to mind, and how well that is achieved, because if you actually stop and think about what you're watching, it's so beyond ridiculous that you could never find it scary, funny, whatever, and let alone heartfelt. And it does all those things, and you finish watching it and it's a real emotional roller coaster. And then, but if you start picking it apart and thinking, what did I just watch? It's ridiculous. And I think that's why it's such a well-made film.
Well, and it's not just nasty and cynical. I mean, it tends to, bad things happen to almost all the characters, but things like the smack addiction of the frog character after Vietnam, and the suspected, was it bunny pox of Harry, the rabbit character. Like, I mean, that they're treated. And again, it's the kind of, we talked about this on a South Park episode a little bit. It's that seriousness that makes it all the funnier because people take it seriously. But it is treated empathetically, isn't it? They're not, they are characters in dire straits, but it's not that there's no heart to it. And obviously, you see that later with Heidi as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But but even to just, I think people forget how hard it is to make a film, and I think it's that thing of like when you actually start to pick it apart and you realize just how crazy and ridiculous it is, but it still has a complete emotional effect, and you do suspend your disbelief when you're watching it, is such an achievement.
Yeah.
And
well, the bit where it makes you care about Harry, and I think one of the funniest moments in the movie still is you've already got the massacre underway, but just the bit where his plotline is just abjectly terminated by Heidi machine gunning his head off.
Yeah.
Because he's one of the more human, relatable characters. Not he's a flawed character, and you're celebrating this, like he gets re-diagnosed basically, and his life's been spared, and he's just completely ruined. Like
he gets taken out in bullet time in slow motion.
It's one that bit still really holds up. I think I hope I've not spoiled it for our audience by saying that. I had
the comic timing in it is just brilliant.
It is. It's fantastic. I had an interesting question. We talk about different life stages and stuff, and I want to sort of hopefully amusingly put you on the spot here, but just as you know, you were referring before to your son. When do you think you would let your son watch Meet the Feebles?
This is the question of the ages. I think what I'm going to do is try and follow our parents' model, in that I am going to restrict his viewing. I'm going to tell him that there's certain films that I don't think he should watch yet, and stuff. And obviously, when he's over 18 or 16, whatever it is, he can do whatever he wants. But when he's coming to me asking to watch movies, I think I'm going to use my judgment like our parents did, and think that there's something that's going to scare him, because at the end of the day, you're not going to get it right anyway. Because that's I had this conversation with our mum recently, and she said it's always the things you think are fine that are going to scare your kids, and it's always the things that you think are scary aren't going to. You can't really make accurate judgments. But I think it would have to be based on what he's seen thus far. But put it this way, that the Feebles will be at the top of a high mountain of videos to climb. It will certainly not be one of the first movies he gets to see, that's for sure.
He may have watched things like Lord of the Rings by then, for example, and then you'll be able to do the thing of, he also directed other stuff. And,
this stuff. It's a really difficult question to answer. I don't know what the right thing to do is. I mean, I part of me thinks I should just let him watch whatever he wants whenever. But then I think that part of the joy of getting into films for me, especially as a kid, was having restrictions, was going into Blockbusters and seeing huge 18 stamps, on movies and them being restricted, because it just made them so much more appealing, and it was the fun of it's almost like achievement unlocked. You got to see Scream, and then you got to see Nightmare on Elm Street, then you got to see The Exorcist, then you got to see Candyman, and it's kind of, you were like climbing this ladder of these restricted movies. So I do want to put in some restrictions in place, just because I know it'll make the viewing experiences for him more fun.
And one of the reasons I like doing these podcasts with you is and that it's maybe we can get stuff out of it that you wouldn't get from talking to other people in this respect, is that you can obviously share, as you do on your regular podcast, you can talk to people with a fairly shared background, fairly similar generational background about shared experiences. But the fact that we had literally the same experience, the same environment growing up, we grew up in the same house, it means we can directly compare how we actually got hold of that media. Because I was just thinking the interesting thing about Meet the Feebles, and your son watching it one day, is you're like for the listeners, Matt has quite a few DVDs. He has physical media lying around the house in an observable way. But you're kind of probably the last generation of parents who do, in a sense. I don't mean to oversimplify it, because I know people 10 years younger than you have some physical possessions and stuff. I know it's not that simple, but in terms of media consumption, that really will be fading, won't it? It won't go away completely, but it will be fading. And if you had like a very austere, minimal house with no cultural clutter at all in it, Luca wouldn't get to pick up media like that, would he? He'd pick it up. I'm sure he'd pick it up. I'm sure they'll work it out. They'll be browsing everything basically, online.
There's always the public consciousness. Things are always like being talked about and stuff. I think it's been a long time till things like The Exorcist aren't considered the scariest movies of all time, and Jaws and things like that. I think they've got a long lifespan yet. But I understand what you mean, not to physically have these adverts for movies lying around your house.
I mean, their equivalent will be getting into your Netflix account and things, won't it? Not that they'll necessarily take all the lessons from you guys, we'll steer from you guys, but they'll be exposed to your curated media online in that sense. But yeah, be fascinating.
They'll still have the fear when looking at covers of when the Conjuring 3, cover comes up and it looks foreboding and it looks scary and it's got an 18 stamp on it. So I guess it's the same thing. It's just in a different way. But he'll see the adverts on Amazon rather than the VHS covers in Blockbusters, that kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, as much as I romanticize Blockbuster video and video rental, which I do, and I think it was a fantastic way to be introduced to movies as well as the cinema, I think it's not changed all that much, really. It will be. They'll have similar choices to make, and at the end of the day, who are we to decide what movies should and should not be seen by people? It's one of these things. I think you discover them when you're ready, and sometimes you see movies that you're not ready for, and that just creates, it kind of creates, anxious thoughts. But that's kind of a good thing, because then you've got appropriate sort of fear reception. You know that you're scared. It's a very human thing to be scared. So we shouldn't be scared of being scared.
Yeah, we'll start him off on All About Eve.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, as we hinted before, with our own dad, like the stuff that ends up meaning a lot to your son probably will be stuff that you dismiss as adolescent rubbish.
Yeah, that's the tragedy, isn't
and that's
it?
fine.
I'm going to start not understanding what he's watching and stuff, because it's like, at the moment you're kind of in this phase of life, in our early 30s, where you kind of like, you still feel like you've kind of got a handle on what the kids are watching and what's cool. But you
can at least kid yourself into thinking that. That's the phase I'm in.
Yeah, you really don't. Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, we're in our imperial phase where culture's for us,
Yeah.
which will not last. Well, thanks for joining me, Matt. I've really appreciated talking about all about Eve and Meet the Feebles.
My pleasure. Which we've certainly got the uniquest podcast episode in the world. I don't think there's anyone else who are going to be talking about these two things at the same time.
Yeah, it's I'm enjoying that. I must say, I'm getting a thrill out of that. Thanks for joining me and talking about those things with me. It's been a real blast. So and I hope to have you on again soon.
My pleasure.
For people who might want to find more stuff that you've done on the internet, would you like to tell them what you've been up to recently?
Yeah, so me and Mike are still remotely recording our podcast, Matt and Mike Pull Focus, where we talk about our favourite films and films that people may not have seen. We have just uploaded our Spirited Away episode to YouTube, and the next episode will be our top 5 movie intros, and after that we are doing An American Werewolf in London, which is one of my favourite films of all time. So you can find us on YouTube, we're on Twitter, and wherever you find your podcasts.
And thanks for joining me, Matt. It was fantastic, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye. You've been listening to the EscapeGoat podcast, hosted by David Blake Fagiani. If you want to contact the podcast with any feedback or thoughts, you can leave comments on our Libsyn page or under our YouTube videos, or email us at escapegoatpod@gmail.com. You can also reach the show on Twitter on @egoat_pod and follow us for new episode notifications, or get me personally on @dbfagiani. This podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as our Libsyn site, escapegoatpodcast.libsyn.com. Original intro, outro, and any other incidental music for this podcast is composed, produced, and made available by permission of Richard Gilbert. Yeah, I was just saying, did you get the chance to listen to the Roger Rabbit episode at all?
Yeah, I listened to the whole thing. It was brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you've just reminded me. Since I listened to it, I've been meaning to rewatch the scene with the hitting the lamp scene you were talking about with the animation.
Yes, yeah. Was it bumping the lamp was the phrase you used?
Yeah, that's brilliant. I've never paid specific attention to that, but again, I think it's that invisible art thing where it's done so well you don't necessarily notice things like that because it's just all so amazing.
It's fantastic. I meant to say, by the way, I said briefly, but like your intros podcast that you sent over was really good.
Oh, thank you, man. Cheers. Yeah. Nice one.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I thought you on Batman Returns there, it was just so fluent and persuasive. Like people listening to that who have never seen it or have written it off, we'll go back to it, I think.
Yeah, it's easy to talk about stuff you're really passionate about. It's very easy just to kind of. I mean, sometimes it's difficult finding the words. Like or changing. You need a thesaurus because you're just like, it's so amazingly, brilliantly excellent. But it's like you have to kind of find different words to describe it. But yeah, thank you, man. That's really cool.
It's nice to like things, isn't it?
I don't know if you feel the same, but because I think about things I like all the time. So I think about Zombie Flesh Eaters or Batman Returns, System of a Down. I always forget that I don't know anyone else who talks about Batman Returns, Zombie Flesh Eaters, or System. So it's like. I feel like I'm always boring people by talking about it, but then I think to myself, not people. I think people can't read your mind. You always assume that people know what you're thinking and that your thoughts are like everyone's thoughts, but it's not true. So therefore, I find listening to stuff interesting that I don't know about. And so as long as you
they become somewhat niche, don't they? I mean, like just by aging. I mean, obviously aging has its lack of benefits as well, but like the niche things you were into that maybe a lot of people were just through osmosis in the mid-noughties, now people aren't, and System are one of those things,
True.
So it's...
But I'm waiting for the next wave is going to be the, the Candyman thing, when that comes out, and it's going to be everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of... And it's that, like, sort of silly, like, petulant feeling of, like, I liked it first. I've been talking about this shit for 20 years, But anyway.
That's going to be fascinating, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
I got that client... Do you remember I was telling you... I can't remember if I sent it you, but about... A few months ago, I was listening to this podcast by that Kit Power and George Lee, the people they were talking about The Thief of Always, the Clive Barker book that I didn't know much about. That's basically a kid's book about someone who kind of finds like it's almost like an orphanage for kids that's like sucking them in and is run by some like evil spirit or something. I've got a copy of that, but I was thinking what Luca might make of that if he stumbled across it when he was like 8, 9 or something. Like, it's I'm definitely going to keep a copy lying around.
I really wish I'd been more into reading as a kid. Actually, I really do, because I mean I love audiobooks now. I can't stop listening to them, but I still can't unless it's a very particular thing like The Exorcist or some short horror stories. I really can't read very well. It just doesn't keep my attention. I'm much more of a visual learner.
I suppose it's a borderline compulsion for me, really, wasn't it? Like, I mean, I still read an awful lot, mostly non-fiction, and read the news all the time and everything. But I kind of
it must have been tricky for mum and dad. Like, stop reading, and it's like it's like
stop bettering yourself,
Matilda and shit.
Get back down the mines.
Shut up, Danny DeVito.
Yeah, I mean, I was arguably a bit too into reading in the sense, just in the sense that like mum would joke, wouldn't it, about me just like missing the holidays basically because I was doing that too.
And books in the bath, like wrinkled covers, and also like walking down the stairs and like bumping into me and stuff. Like, I mean,
oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, no, all my books were ruined basically. Yeah. I actually remember, this is not like the most intellectual thing I ever read, obviously, but like I remember one of those holidays being on a sort of rooftop pool with you and hanging out with you a lot and doing a lot of swimming and stuff, but also reading the Star Wars sequel trilogy as it was then. It's funny we just talked about the Star Wars sequel trilogy, but this is the proper one. The Timothy Zahn books,
the Thrawn trilogy.
The Thrawn trilogy. Yeah, the Thrawn trilogy. I remember reading those for the first time on that rooftop, alongside the novelization of the Star Wars trilogy. Actually, I think it was like I read that as well, and just lap those up.
That would be great, man. Like I listened to an audiobook of the first one of the first Thrawn book, and it was just great. And I remember thinking, as a Star Wars fan, like this would be so great to read this, and like there is a continuation. That's like that shot in Rise of Skywalker, where you see Luke training Leia and they're running around, and it's a really well done digital mock-up. That just made me so excited. I was like, that's what I wanted to see. Yeah. Like, that's kind of like all that shit, And the New Republic, I really want to see that. That scene in Mandalorian where the New Republic ships show up, like the X-Wings and stuff. I wanted more politics, but more politics done well. Like in a...
Yeah, and you can do the politics stuff quite quickly. You can get it over with and quite digestibly. It doesn't... I know my ideal Star Wars movie would be ridiculous. It would be... again, it's like, I don't want that movie. Yeah. But you can put bits of spice in it. The annoying thing about the Thrawn trilogy is like they have a lot of stuff in there that I didn't think I was going to get that as a sequel trilogy, but I thought they were going to do similarly good things in The Force Awakens. Like I started watching The Force Awakens, then it came back with like the First Order and stuff, and the Republic's meant to have won basically, but this is this new kind of fascist revival movement kind of coming to take it back on, and that's kind of what they do in the Thrawn trilogy, except it's like the scattered remnants of the Empire. It's like a last stand that starts to spiral against the Republic. But that was actually one of my biggest disappointments about The Last Jedi, was just it just showed that the First Order was suddenly winning to the point of like they basically had won, and I was like, no, you've just skipped all the interesting bits.
Yeah, like also when did they win? Like because there was literally like when they have test screenings and they get people to say did you notice any glaring cuts where we didn't understand what was happening? There was a bit in The Force Awakens where they test Starkiller Base and they blow up that planet. And, and someone goes like, who is it? And it's like, the Republic. And you're like, what? Is that Coruscant that's just blown up? Or is that just a planet? Like, with some Republic people on it? Like, do you know what I mean? It's like, that was so unclear, that bit for me. And like you said, then it's like, so is there no Republic left and it's just fucking these few people? That was so, like, dangerously unclear. I was like, what the fuck?
And again, it's that thin line of like Star Wars is essentially for kids, and like it's meant to have a really simple plot, but that was like childish to the point of stupid, wasn't it? It was like, well, how did that happen then? Like it was kind of me and Rich, who both read the Thrawn trilogy as kids, we were saying that the second movie. So the thing about The Last Jedi is you can do loads of that stuff in it. I like a lot of stuff in The Last Jedi. I don't resent it. I don't have no issue at all with any of the Luke Skywalker stuff. Don't mind any of that. You can do all Luke's last stand. You can do his bitterness. You can do his turning against the Jedi. All that kind of stuff. All that's fine. But me and Rich were saying the second movie should be the Siege of Coruscant. Like it should be You could do a massive epic space battle with that, but also end on a down note, like an Empire-esque down note, like the First Order take Coruscant.
Yeah.
Like, and maybe like Luke delays them slightly so the ships can get away. But that's the thing, and that's the big sea change.
Yeah, or they try and take it and end up blowing it up. And that would have been really tragic if they just sort of, they had this huge battle that was all for nothing, and then they just end up destroying it, like, and killing billions of people. Earth. And that would have been
that's like that, and that's the revelation of how far the First Order will go.
Exactly.
Like, if they can't have it, no one will.
Then you've got this emotional connection with, like, oh my god, these guys are willing to do anything. Like these are worse than the Empire.
Yeah, that could be the decision that what's he called, Adam Driver, whatever he's called,
Kylo,
that he takes. That could to show you that he is more than the heir to Darth Vader, or like he's willing to do things just as ruthless, if not more so, than Darth Vader.
And all of them are like, no, you can't do a genocide. Like, it's okay on Alderaan.
Yeah, even the Empire, even the Imperial, even the First Order troops are like what? Like, we didn't sign up for this,
Yeah. Boy, is he strict.
Yeah. Oh, I just want... That's Headley.
I love that bit where he's running, look, Mom, Hedy Lamar. Headley. Like, with the handprints.
Oh, man, I want a Star Wars movie with him as one of the Imperial officers. Grand Moff Headley.
Yeah. Someone should deep fake that. You could do that. Yeah. So now just think of your secretary. There we go. That's a very good suggestion. Yeah.
Or Mel Brooks is a Grand Moff. Otherwise, here's me saying Last Jedi should be less like Spaceballs, so I won't contradict myself.
Just as a cap on that bit, yeah. I can understand the not wanting to show Coruscant ever again after the prequel trilogy. To be fair, I can understand that, and they're probably the big pulls. Like, they probably did have scenes in the Senate and stuff, and they're like, no, we can't even go there. Like, the fans are gonna hate that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay, we will really stop talking about this now, but I don't think everything about the prequel trilogies is bad. Like there is bathwater to keep in there, so to speak.
Yeah, it's not, to me. It's not it's not the plot that's the problem. The plot's fine. Like, I don't mind the plot of the prequels. It's just the execution of it. Just purely that.
Yeah.
It's the script.
Well, I feel guilty that the Phantom Menace is kind of the one I enjoyed the most, but I agree with critics who say that you don't actually need that in the trilogy. like in terms of plot, you could basically start at 2, which is true, really.
Yeah, like that whole pod race thing is amazing, but it doesn't really further the plot apart from. Like, the Jedis, they could just nick them both. What? Yeah. Like, I love that. Like, even what hold does Watto have on anyone? Like, really?
Yeah. Feared slaver Watto.
Yeah, like, they literally could have put him in a paper bag. Literally put him in a paper bag for a week and nicked 2 people and left. Like, it's funny. Yeah, because the slavery angle doesn't make any moral sense for good guys to be tolerating, but it also doesn't make any logistical sense. It's like, how is this being enforced? Yeah, all they need to do is
why does no one care about the droids?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Who are like provably property, and sentient.
Like Watto, you could literally punch him in the face, like he would die, and that would be fine.
He'd probably just give up as well.
Yeah. You just hold him for a sec.
Take him one.
Yeah.
Qui-Gon Jinn was not doing his job there.
Yeah, I know they're not allowed to kill anyone, but they literally didn't have to do that. All they had to do was put Watto in a cupboard for a bit.
Or you're under arrest.
You're under arrest for slavery. Yeah. It's like,
for slavery.
Yeah. Why did they just pull the lightsabers out? Like, like Watto's not going to be, like he tries the mind trick. It's like, surely the Jedi order is try the mind trick and then pull out the lightsaber. Like, surely that's like the 2 kind of, orders of things. And just nick a young kid for a bit. It just doesn't make, I never thought of that. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I'm sure it wasn't this democratic, but you'd almost love to be the guy around you go back in time and you can be around the boardroom table when like the plot was being hashed out for Phantom Menace. Be like, hang on.
Yeah, hang on. Why didn't they belong to Jabba the Hutt or something? You know what I mean? Because Jabba the Hutt's actually got some nous, in the galaxy. Yeah. So he controls a load of shit. That would have been way more believable.
Yeah. And it's established as being there and stuff.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that. That's so stupid.
The plot.
Yeah. So stupid.
Yeah. Anyway, it's nothing more energizing than rehashing the Phantom Menace, is there?